Okay, so welcome to the first episode. My name's Eckhart, and I'm with Professor Elvira Simfa. Um, we're going to be talking about, topics that revolve around feminism, women's issues, etc. Would you like to introduce yourself first, and then we could go on from there?
I can just correct your introduction.
Okay.
Which has to do with the different ways how you call someone who's teaching in the university in different languages. I'm not a professor.
Okay.
I am simply a lecturer, way more modest position.
Okay. But a philosopher, nonetheless.
A philosopher, nonetheless, with the necessary education and the position in the academic world, yes.
And do you want to talk about a bit about your background in philosophy first? Like what you might specialize in?
I can do that. Let's start with the fact that my background is only in philosophy. Which means that since high school, after I finished high school, I started to study philosophy. I entered the bachelor program in the University of Latvia. I studied philosophy, still the old way, namely 4 years, not 3 as it is now in the bachelor program. And then I just very systematically, without any interruptions, I went to the master program, and then I entered the PhD program. And then I obtained my PhD, and then I started to work for the faculty and parallelly for the Institute of Philosophy and Sociology, which is also a structural unit of the University of Latvia. So mainly I work for the University of Latvia.
Okay.
But I do teach also in the Riga Stradiņš University and the Academy of Arts, or Art Academy now, I'm not sure how they call themselves in English.
They change around every time.
However, there is just one in Latvia, so there can be no misunderstanding whatsoever. And I specialize in the philosophy of Immanuel Kant.
Yeah.
It's a bit wider, my specialty. This is just a philosophical period of that time.
Like Enlightenment, German philosophers,
yes, German philosophers of Enlightenment, if you want to put it like that. But mainly Kant, and I wrote my dissertation on Kant's ethics and anthropology.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
You wrote about Kant and love, right? The ethics of love, or?
Just about ethics.
Okay.
Major concept there is self-love.
Self-love, okay.
Yes, which is the main problem for Kant in ethics. This is why it's a certain topic of interest for me.
Okay, that's interesting. And I believe we talked, briefly before about some things about being a woman, I guess, in philosophy. And you recommended me to watch that video with Hannah Arendt, the interview.
Yes.
Yes, and I saw that, and I want to ask, what is your personal experience being a woman in philosophy, especially, I guess, in an Eastern European country? Because I know it's a very different, I would assume it's a different experience than, a woman studying philosophy in a Western country, for example.
I'm not sure, since I have experience of studying in a Western country, in Germany, but I had no feeling that there is a great difference. At least not when it comes to me being a woman. But of course, mainly I can talk about my experience here. And what can I say? I can say, like Hannah Arendt does in that interview of 1964 that you
It was
watched.
great, by the way, yeah.
It is great. Yeah. I can answer approximately the same way. It was never a major issue for me.
Mm-hmm.
I never saw any purely practical problems related to my gender, nor did I ever see any kind of slightest mistreatment, or what you could call it discrimination, in the attitude from the senior staff towards me or my other female colleagues compared to the male colleagues. It has never been an issue for me. I believe it in our countries, and here I talk about Eastern European and Western European countries together. It only becomes an issue if you make it an issue. I believe it's a real issue only, I don't know, in countries like Afghanistan.
Like in the Middle East, and
Well,
I guess I guess you could say third world countries if you like to use that term. Or...
Well, yeah, however, I don't want to evaluate these countries, but there is a certain obvious problems with being a woman and doing something in your life. But if I can correct or add something to the practical aspect of being a woman in this field or any other field, the practical problems are only, well, they become obvious or important when you start to have a family life, namely children. And this is mostly not a problem while you study. This is a problem when you have already reached a certain age and you work.
Yeah.
Because students there are students that have children, of course, but the majority don't. And now more and more students, they choose to ground family in a later age. However, there is a problem, but it's a practical problem, because women, and this of course, I don't know how to explain it, but of course once they have children, they're more responsible. It takes more of their time, and then it's difficult to continue to work in the same speed with the same efficiency as the male colleagues do.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that's a reason why men tend to get into higher positions, or like tend to get promoted more, or maybe they'll get paid a bit more because they, have this sort of freedom from the work, since they don't have to, work through childbearing pregnancy or to really rear children during that time, because it's mainly seen as a woman's job to do that, at least in society.
You mean particularly in academia or in any other?
Particularly in academia, at least what we're talking about now. Because I guess in other jobs, for example in business, that tends to be the case from what I've seen.
Yes, I believe it's the same kind of problem. And yes, I think it's as you described it. If you go through the pregnancy, it's not always easy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a fairy tale that pregnancy, till you hit the 7th month, when you are allowed in our country, when you're allowed to take the pregnancy leave, you are allowed
After
to do
7
that.
months.
Yes, when you reach 7 months, till the month 9, you're sort of entitled to be on the pregnancy leave. This is thought to be very easy and non-problematic to work till the 7th month of pregnancy. Well, pregnancies are very difficult. It's very complicated to go through them. They're different. In the beginning, you can have you can feel more than sick, and I mean, I know what I'm saying. And then after, you can get all sorts of problems. You have to stay in the hospital for a week or for 2, and then you start your pregnancy leave, and then 3 months, and then you give birth, and then there's a baby on your hands. And unless you have a very comfortable life, enough of money, a husband who can provide, or a great state social support system, friends and relations and family that are willing and ready to help you, then you're pretty much tied to that baby. And I cannot see or imagine how is it that you can, I don't know, read Hegel with a screaming baby in the background when you don't sleep, when you're tired, when
I can't imagine that as like a man who, who has no children, who doesn't have any financial issues. Like, it's already hard to read Hegel, so...
It's already hard when you don't have anyone, but if you're constantly with the baby on your hands and he's screaming, and then when they get bigger, they sort of get independent, but that they're constantly sick, they're always sick. This
especially
idea,
during the first 2 years.
Yeah, that you put your child in the kindergarten and that's it, then you go to work. That doesn't work, people.
Of course.
Because he goes to the kindergarten 1 week, and then for 3 weeks he's at home, and that's you who are stuck with him.
And you guys are sort of pigeonholed into that situation, I guess. Like, you guys are stuck in it, if I could say that. And it's interesting you bring that up, because I think a big part of the wage gap that people don't talk about is the fact that women do a sort of service to society and they don't get paid for it, which is pregnancy. And people do jobs that they love. Like women will say, "Oh, it's fine because I love having children and I love taking care of my child." But I mean, you can say that you love your job. Like let's say as a philosopher, you love your job as a philosopher, or you love your job as a doctor, but you still expect to be paid for the work that you do. And I believe as women, the work they do for society should also be paid. At least that's my belief. Like going through pregnancy, I believe women should be paid at least to some extent for this sort of uh, how could I say, the sort of debt to society that they are taking upon themselves.
There's a certain social support. It doesn't have to be always in terms of money,
Mm-hmm.
but there has to be some kind of system in place that, for instance, you have a nanny who's available if you can't bring your child to the kindergarten or school, or when he's very tiny and he's not even accepted in a kindergarten.
Mm-hmm.
That, I don't know, some kind of system that helps you, that frees your time. That's of course necessary because you simply haven't got time to work. And of course in the academia, you always have to to keep reading, keep writing, keep publishing,
If you don't
keep
publish, you're
participating
basically
in the conferences. Yeah, but try to write a scientific article. That's very complicated. It takes a lot of your time. You
Of
need
course.
a lot of concentration. You need silence. You cannot be bothered every 5 minutes. That's impossible. So to some extent, I'm not gonna say now, but for a lot of women that I know, that is a choice. Either they like the job, and I'm not only talking about my colleagues in philosophy, but also to friends that are working in other fields, female friends that I have, that are successful in business or anywhere else. For a lot of them, it's quite a choice, and some of them have chosen not to have children, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
For that, they're more successful in their job, but I don't know, maybe they're never going to regret that. Maybe it's an old-fashioned idea to think that the women would at some point regret that. But however it is, I don't think that women should face that choice. Either work or
Children.
babies. Yes.
I think there's a huge issue because men don't really have to face that choice, or at least for the most part, in their career life, because they have the wife who has to go through that burden. And yeah, I'm not sure what you think is the best way to go through with this, because for me, I think it's kind of hard to sort of separate this barrier, like between biological men and biological women, because men will never be able to have children. But I think it would be fair, at least, to make sure that women have some sort of support, either financially or, as you said, like with time, going through the entire pregnancy as well, like from the beginning to the end, as well as at least like a year after with the child, because that entire time takes a lot of effort from what I've seen, and I'm sure like you understand, like it must be like really crazy to go through that.
It does. It takes a lot of effort. And by the way, of course, you know that there's a tendency now for a lot of young men to take care of their children, to give a much bigger support to their wives. Now young husbands and fathers or partners, whatever, they're much more involved in the family life. However, the way I experience it is of course a certain relief for a woman, but still it doesn't give them the equal position to equal. They're still not equal. It's a bit easier for her, yes, but doesn't mean that they're equal. And I don't see how this equality can be ensured when at one point the doctors are saying, the society is saying, you have to breastfeed, and then at the same time that you have to work. Where do you, the breastfeeding, that children are breastfed every 2 hours. Small children. That can last till a year.
I could imagine, and I know I've also heard like you can't really give them that sort of baby formula anymore as well, because it's like bad, like doesn't have everything that a child needs.
No, yes, the pressure. Well,
so So there's
There
like,
is, of course, an opinion that the formula is as good as the breast
oh,
milk,
but that's not true though. Like from the research that's been shown, like I know that Nestle, sort of how can I say, they handled this idea that this formula is an all-serving sort of serum that will help you and your baby, and it's better than even breast milk. But they did research, and it was basically just like a filler, sort of. Yeah.
That's their business, all right. But yes, most of the doctors sincerely are saying, and they don't do that to terrorize you.
Yeah.
But all the doctors whom I have been in contact with, they say yes, you have to breastfeed as long as it's possible.
Of course.
Like literally. And this is what most of the women do, because of course they want the best for the children. And I want to see how this is actually possible for a man to get involved in the breastfed infant to the same extent as a breastfeeding mother is involved. That's not possible. I know solutions. I know, for instance, other Western countries have solutions. They put their children in, I'm not sure how it's called in English. In French it's called the crèche. It's yes, it's sort of a kindergarten for very tiny babies.
Mm-hmm. It's like where they have like a milkmaid.
Yes. But then the women, they pump the breast milk and they give it with the baby. But you see, for that you have to make sure that the country ensures you these institutions, that women trust these institutions. It's our women. They're very careful with all sorts of state-provided services where they care for infants or for old people, because they just don't trust them. They know how little people who work there are paid.
And I mean, I can understand. I actually kind of wanted to roll into that. Like in these ex-Soviet countries, a lot of women I see have a sort of distaste or distrust for the governments here. And we sort of see, I was reading this book about, called, I think, Gender Matters in the Baltics. It was published by Latvia's university. And they were talking about how there's a big exodus of women leaving for Western European countries from the Baltic states. So from Lithuania, from Estonia, from Latvia. And they tend to have this sort of brain drain. So a lot of educated women who don't really trust the government or don't like how little they're paid here will end up leaving the country. And I just want to know, like, your thoughts on that. And, is there a way that these countries can sort of stem that flow of women leaving the country? Or, like, educated women leaving the country?
Yeah, with these simple social security tools. That would be very easy. It's not much necessary, just to invest some money, smartly to invest some money. Which no one, of course, wants to do.
Yeah.
It's a catastrophic situation here. Can't get your child in a state-paid kindergarten. It's impossible to get places. So people are paying to the private, and that, of course, depends on whether or not you have something to pay. It's a catastrophe what's happening here. I know people don't talk so much about it. They're sort of used to it, as to a certain normality, but I'm not. I'm living in two countries, because my husband works for the European institutions, and I'm living partly here and partly in Belgium.
Okay.
And I see how it's happening there. And I'm also familiar with the French welfare system and what they do for women and families with children. How much more comfortable it is, how much more welcoming, how much is provided by the state. It's incomparable.
And do you mind if I ask, have you stayed here mainly because you want to educate people here, or?
Because my work is here.
Okay.
I'm very attached to my work. And it's, well, very difficult. Possibly it's not something that I should be saying out loud, but most of my colleagues know it anyway. It's very difficult to get a similar position in any other Western university. It's very complicated. The competition is enormous, and if you don't start from the beginning there, if you don't enroll in a master or a PhD program, for instance, in some German university, the chances for you to become a lecturer in a German university, just out of the blue, they're tiny, almost impossible. Not because we would be bad, not because we're bad. It's just the competition is enormous.
No, I totally agree with that. And I mean, I think just in general, humanities has a very serious problem with people trying to sort of break through, because not everybody can be a lecturer. Like if you have like 20 kids studying philosophy or history, they can't all end up becoming a lecturer at the same university. So you have to figure out what happens with the other students, and the state doesn't really fund I guess these sort of faculties as much as I would like, or probably as much as you would like.
Yeah, very.
And I'm not sure.
But I believe it's not a problem only in the humanities. I don't think that the women that work, I don't know, in the Institute of Physics, for instance, that if they decide to move to Germany or France or whatever, that they immediately get a place in the university. No, I think they pretty much work in McDonald's.
Oh, well,
or something like that.
For speaking from my experience, a lot of because I do research at Stradina as well, and a lot of the women, it's actually surprising because most of the people I work with are women. I think, like, for example, in the Oncology Institute where I'm doing research, there's about 1 or 2 men that work with me, and then the rest are women, and there's about 7 or 8 women, so it surprised me a bit. But from a lot of the people I've spoken to, they end up going to Switzerland or Germany because there are better job opportunities for them there, and they don't want to, live in a country that they see as backwards. Like, this is what they have told me, and of course this is all anecdotal. I hope nobody takes this as pure fact, but I think it's telling when you have these very highly educated women, one of the girls I was talking to was she just graduated, she's a doctor, and she didn't want to stay in Latvia. First, they didn't have a position for pediatrics, and then she said, okay, well, I'm going to go to Germany or Switzerland because first the pay is much better, they have more support for people looking for these positions, and it's just better life overall for me and when I want to have kids.
This is in medicine. In medicine, I do believe the situation is different. People who are educated here, who have the medical education here, they can find the appropriate job as doctors there in the Western countries. But I don't believe it works for every other field.
Okay. No, I totally, I can see that, I can agree with that as well. I guess, do you mind if we go stay a bit on the question?
No, we can move away from this. The children topic is just...
I just hope I wasn't taking up too much, so...
But to sum up, I really think that makes the largest difference.
Mm-hmm.
The largest practical difference between men and women. That's the actual difference, the children. And when there are no children, I don't believe that there is any great difference.
But one of the main reasons why I wanted to start these interviews was because I noticed when I watched on the internet, I would see a lot of women speaking on issues about feminism, and this happened also with philosophy, like men speaking on things about philosophy, like sort of these pop philosophers like Jordan Peterson, for example. And for me, what really made me want to do this was seeing a model talk about feminism. I was like, and she was getting millions of likes on her videos, and I was like, why are they getting all this attention when we have educated women who spend their lives studying these sort of topics or writing about these topics, and yet we never get to hear their voice. And I just want to know your opinion, or what do you think about this sort of popification of feminism? Because and I can explain that a little bit more. We have a lot of women who will use feminism as a means to promote themselves, because it's pretty popular to be like a radical feminist now. So they'll use it to promote their their modeling careers, or maybe they'll use it to promote their OnlyFans. I'm not sure if you know about that, but I think it's becoming a bigger and bigger issue that people are sort of being very performative in their activism, and they don't really care much about the actual they don't really care much about actual feminism or fighting for actual rights of women or for the betterment of women. I just want to know like your personal opinion on that, or what issues you might see with that, or if that's even an issue for you.
No, feminism has never been something that I'm very much interested in. But this is not a problem of feminism. It's just my specific character and field of interest. But the problem you mentioned, this is very important, and I do believe it's a part of a larger trend or tendency, or I would call it a problem. Namely, and it has something to do with this popularity of the left liberal position, what you didn't want to accept. Well, basically, I think that there's a set of topics now kept alive and talked about by largely people who can be identified as these left liberals, either more or less educated, and belonging to this or that field. And they and the problem with that is the following: that they sort of keep up these problems, the questions of the equality of the gender, or the gender identity politics problems that are related to that, or even the problems of the environment. They sort of try to keep them up as the problems relating to the traditional social values, the values of the traditional old leftism or Marxism. Namely, that this has something to do with ensuring equality and better life conditions. They think that these performative actions, screaming somewhere on the TV or in social network about feminism or gender politics or environment or whatever, that has something to do with the good old-fashioned traditional left fight for equality and better living conditions, and that there's nothing to do. And what I do care about is actual improvement of living and working conditions for women. Like, make available kindergartens. I don't care what they talk about in the television about whether or not ladies should be left in first. That's ridiculous. And then they blow these up as the biggest problems for women, that women are, I don't know, and this what came out in this Me Too movement, it's terribly insulting or problematic that the man, I don't know, touches your bottom, or I don't know, smiles at you, or winks you with an eye, whatever. No, this is not a big problem. What?
Could you? I'm gonna play.
No, the actual problem is when you don't know where to put your child when he's sick. This is the actual problem, and no one talks about it. They don't talk about it.
I understand, and maybe I can play devil's advocate a bit here, but do you think that people could be mad at two things at the same time? Because, I mean, I understand that there are, like, much bigger issues, and me personally, I think there are other issues that we better spend our time on. But could people maybe be mad at, men catcalling, and also catcalling, like, a man on the street is like, oh, hey, you look so cute today. Like,
I actually do enjoy that.
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of women have said that they've enjoyed it. Like, a lot of women that I've met here, they're like, oh, I don't mind that. Like, when I go outside, I like when men look at me or blah blah blah.
Yes.
And I was so surprised by that. Like, I
start to feel that there's something wrong with me if I don't. I start to feel old.
But do you think maybe that has to do with this patriarchal sort of standards that I guess are ingrained into our society, where oh, I feel old if a man doesn't think I'm attractive, or I don't feel I'm not attractive if men will not catcall me on the
Yes,
street.
that might have
Yeah.
something to do. I'm not saying that it doesn't,
Mhm.
but first of all, it doesn't necessarily. There's no rational argument that that because of these patriarchal structures are wrong and to be
Of course.
completely eliminated in all their expressions. And to some extent, yes, they are wrong when it really comes to not paying women as much as men in the working place.
Mhm.
But not everywhere where they are expressed they are wrong or problematic.
That's interesting, actually, to hear
And
that.
even if I am educated, and I feel like that because I am educated even in wrong patriarchal structures, that simply doesn't change the way I feel. This is the way I feel. I'm not. I don't think I'm gonna feel any different by now. I'm 35 years old. This is too late. And moreover, I feel comfortable living like that. Doesn't cause me any problems. I don't feel any humiliation, and I don't want anyone to tell me that I'm supposed to feel humiliated because of that. I don't know what right would they have to tell me that.
Oh no, like I totally get that. And I know like I've been asking you a lot about how you feel as a woman, and I just want to ask if, me asking all these questions, does that in any sense bother you? Because I mean, a man like me is just asking you all these questions. Oh, do you feel this in this way by men, or do you feel subjugated or even put down by patriarchy? Does that sort of, I guess, take a hit to your self-worth by saying like, oh, I don't really feel all these things. I don't know why you have to ask these questions, because to me, I'm just a woman, and none of these sort of questions really matter to the identity of a woman.
Some of the questions do,
Yeah.
but they're far less interesting for a broad public. And actually, I told you what really matters. What really matters are very simple, practical issues.
Mm-hmm.
And with the rest, women are different, and I believe that even in a patriarchal structure, educated women could somehow feel humiliated by this, what you said, catcalling?
Yeah.
What did you call it? Catcalling? I
Catcalling,
didn't
yeah.
know that.
New word.
They can feel, but they have every right in our society to answer the man, to tell him I don't like it, or shut up, or you can insult him back, for Christ's sake, you can do everything you want. No, there's no... If you enjoy it, you enjoy it. If you don't, you just say you don't enjoy it, and that's it.
As I was talking about the popification, do you think it sort of hurts women when other women, for example, these like a model will promote feminism and spread, some sort of idea of feminism that maybe most, I guess,
women don't share,
or at least educated women might not share. Like, there's a lot of, so for an example, there's a lot of people or like models that will promote OnlyFans to younger women, and they'll use it as a justification for saying women should be proud of their bodies, but in reality, most, I guess, educated women will say things like, oh, you're promoting this sort of sexualization of the female body.
What's an OnlyFans?
OnlyFans is a website where it's a website where anybody can post videos, but it's mainly used by sex workers to post pornography.
Okay.
Yes.
I think that this is not a question of whether or not you are educated. These kind of questions are to be answered by people not speaking from their position in the university or elsewhere, but simply from their position as citizens or belonging to a certain society. So when you ask me these questions, I think it's right to say that I don't answer them as a philosopher.
Okay.
I answer them as a certain woman, member of this society.
Okay.
Given my special character, experience, and all the other particularities, I don't think that these issues or questions can be somehow better answered by people who are or are not educated. I don't see how rational arguments can make a difference here. It's not about rational arguments. I don't think so.
And I think we actually touched also upon these rational arguments in our conversation. I'm not sure if you remember, but we spoke briefly about Kant and how in sort of or at least in this younger generation that are studying philosophy, like or getting into philosophy right now, they look at Kant and they're like, oh, I don't like what he says because he's an old white man, probably had very racist views, very sexist views, so his ideas are null and void. And they'll say this about Marx, Plato, Aristotle, like a lot of old thinkers. And if you just want to speak about that, like, what do you think about, this sort of revisionism of history and of these past philosophers in favor of more modern ones, I guess, more ones that are more palatable to our political or our society nowadays?
I think again that this is a political view and a political position, and it's not a position that can be somehow articulated in a rational way, because there is it's not an argument. It simply is not an argument that I don't like Kant because he's white. There is nothing you can do with this argument.
Mm-hmm.
It's neither good nor bad. I mean, maybe it would be bad as an argument, but there's nothing you can actually do with such an argument. But you can have such a political position, yes, or maybe some would even define their position in these questions as ethical or moral, and that you can have. I mean, I don't share it. I find it mostly coming from a bad education.
Okay.
But I do grant the rights of each person to have them.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't have a place in the university. I don't see how it could have a place in the university, that we select the people we read based on their skin color or ethnical belonging or whatever, national belonging.
Okay.
That there is I don't see any justification. It can only be political, the justification. Okay. And it suddenly comes from the state, a directive that now in the universities you will never read old white men. That can of course influence the life of the university.
Of course.
But that still is going to be a political decision.
But I mean, I do understand how old white men might drive the conversation in certain areas due to their experiences. Because I do think that, race and sex and age also sort of, influence somebody's life, of course, in every sense of the way. But what you're saying is mainly that it's the ideas that really have to be sort of attacked and not, or like that has to be looked through instead of, the person's character. Because I guess in philosophy, anything that has to do with somebody's character or attacking somebody's character is like an ad hominem.
Yes, it's an ad hominem. It doesn't work. It's actually an argumentation mistake.
Yeah.
What you call,
like, a logical fallacy.
And yes, a logical fallacy, and what you actually assume in any kind of in any science. This is the very nature of science, that it pretends to be, and it actually should be. This is why it's the science. Should be independent of any subjective views, including the subject who has actually created this or that scientific theory. I mean, what would you say about Newton? Would we also dismiss him because he's white?
No, I think
Copernicus, maybe.
I think the main issue with science is that their ideas are considered, at least by in the academic field, like in the STEM field, that their ideas are very, like, you can look at them through a microscope and verify them or not. Whereas in philosophy, people tend to have this idea where it's a lot more fluid. And we also discussed this, where I think people have this wrong idea of philosophy nowadays, where they think it's sort of it's not really a science, but it's something that anybody can just go in and make up whatever they want. But it's more nowadays, like it's very logical. It requires a lot of reasoning, and you
Yes.
can't just make anything up on the spot.
Yes,
And
precisely.
I think, at least in my experience from what I've seen at the universities, I studied philosophy in America, where they have like a very strong analytical
Tradition.
tradition.
Yes.
It is very similar to what you do in STEM fields. Like there's a lot of work that goes into it, a lot of reasoning, and even in STEM fields, like what I'm doing now, there is a lot of faith taken into the experiments you make, because you have to put faith into believing that what you're doing is even what's happening in real life. You can look at things through a microscope, but it won't mean anything. Like you have to take the faith that what we do in these experiments is actually the reason why these are happening. And was it not recording? Okay. And for the most part, I think that at least with philosophy and even analytical philosophy, there is a lot that is happening for the most part that requires a lot of logic and reasoning.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
But I would say that it's not all in the case of the analytic philosophy. This is you can that's the easiest way to demonstrate the actual scientific nature or objective nature of philosophy by referring to the analytic philosophy. But in fact, that's not only the case in the analytic philosophy, but also in other fields or branches of philosophy. Philosophy is not as subjective or cloudy or obscure as people think it is.
It really is. I mean,
It's not even Kant. I mean, or Hegel or Marx. It's a wrong view. Mainly coming from the fact that people. I think this is my maybe deeply subjective idea, but I think that people nowadays, they simply don't know how to read these very long and very complicated texts, and it's easier to dismiss them than to read them. Mostly people just don't understand what Hegel writes.
I mean, that's true. I've also seen, which was kind of funny to me, when I've been reading philosophy now, you can have these sort of papers that are just full of formulas that are like mathematical formulas, and it's unbelievable to me how philosophy has come from these long-winded texts to these like sort of mathematical rational formulas. And even now, if you look at some philosophy papers, you'll see graphs in it. Yeah, and I guess for most people, they don't really expect that in a philosophy paper. And I guess for me, I prefer to see philosophy papers without graphs, but I think that's the sort of direction that philosophy is going into.
Yeah, mostly.
Yeah.
Philosophy is very much going in the direction of the analytic tradition, mostly, yes. But the wrong image of philosophy is originating mostly in the existentialism. That I have to say, existentialism gave rise to the idea of philosophy as this field close to the literature, very related to the subjective experience, personal view of the world, personal positioning. This is largely what existentialism is about, but existentialism is not the whole philosophy.
Of course.
It was one of the most popular, due to philosophers like Sartre, for instance, one of the most popular fields of philosophy.
Or Kierkegaard.
It's by far not the most influential or the largest.
Oh, you wouldn't say it's the most influential. I would say it's one of the...
Existentialism? Yeah. I don't know. Depends
I think that the philosophers who have come out of existentialism, like Sartre and Nietzsche, and Kierkegaard to a lesser extent, but they are at least one of the most often cited by non-philosophers. Like people will always bring up Nietzsche, people will always bring up Sartre.
And this exactly is the problem.
Yeah.
Precisely, this is the problem. Because they are the philosophers that are the closest to the people that are non-philosophers. So the people that are non-philosophers, they gain their idea about the whole field of philosophy through these philosophers that they actually can read.
Yeah.
Of course, you can read Sartre.
Sartre he's a good writer as well. Like Nietzsche as well. I've read Nietzsche in German is a lot easier than Hegel in German.
I'm thinking any language.
Yeah.
Ninja would be what you call a lot easier.
Yeah. And I also want to speak, I guess, as we're continuing with the popification.
Popification, that's another
yeah,
term that I learned from you.
I actually made that up. I
Like-
don't know if it's a real term. Like something I just sort of made up on the spot to sort of
something that becomes a
popular, I guess.
Popular.
Yeah,
Yes.
or at least is popular within the non-academic parts of society. And we spoke about like this sort of popification of feminism, but we also sort of see it in philosophy as well, with people like Jordan Peterson, for example. And this is something I kind of wanted to talk about. You might know Jordan Peterson
Yes,
a bit.
I know him.
And so he's a psychologist, for those who don't know, who ended up becoming very popular with some of his books. And people will, cite Jordan Peterson sort of like the next. I'm not sure who you can even compare him to. Like, people really believe in him as, one of the most popular philosophers of our time. And he had this really famous debate with Zizek, and I've watched it one or two times, and I just couldn't believe that someone like him was in a similar position to Zizek, because they were talking, I believe, about Marxism, and it just occurred to me that he had, Peterson had no idea what he was talking about, whereas Zizek, I mean, he's a very accredited
Yes.
thinker, and even if you don't agree with Zizek on his views, the way he analyzes Hegel, as you said before, and the way he analyzes Kant are really great. Like, he takes these amazing perspectives on them, and I just want to know what you think about this sort of popification of philosophy and Jordan Peterson. In particular, definitely. Like, if you want to go in on him, like.
In particular, I know too little about him. I've seen this famous debate with Zizek, and to be honest, I never formed any opinion about him as a philosopher, because I never perceived him as a philosopher.
Of course.
It never even came to my mind that he would be perceived by someone as a philosopher. Popular figure, psychologist, I don't know.
Do you consider Ayn Rand a philosopher?
No.
Okay,
great.
good.
There would be the same problem as with
Yeah.
Peterson. While Zizek, of course, I do consider a very brilliant philosopher. There were times when he helped me a lot in understanding the differences between the metaphysics of Kant and Hegel. I've been struggling with that for a while. He has been very helpful in explaining. He has a talent truly of. Sometimes he doesn't use this talent and he's expressing himself in a very complicated way. But then again, he has a capability of explaining complicated things rather easily, which was helpful for me. Also in the case of Lacan, and I find him brilliant as a philosopher. But I think he has two faces. He's this classical, academia educated philosopher, and then he's also this pop figure.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think that since he has been keeping up these two faces and working in both fields, working on both images, it's okay that as this pop figure he enters into the discussion with people like Jordan Peterson. And I don't even think that he was somehow, humiliated or misplaced in that debate, because he knew what kind of level that's going to be. I think he never expected to talk with Peterson as with a Marxism expert. That's would never the case. I was never looking at this debate from a strictly philosophical perspective.
It was entertainment.
Mostly. And I guess it's somehow, for people that are interested in politics, in the ideologies that are important nowadays, it's interesting.
And I guess we sort of see this clash between left and right ideologies. As I said, I don't really like these terms, but
he's supposed to be right, Jordan Peterson.
Yes, he's considered more right or center right, and a lot of his ideas have been taken by the alt-right, so the alternative right. I'm not sure if you guys have that actually in Eastern Europe, if you guys have this sort of movement of alt-right, like alternative right figures, or these sort of far-right extremists. Uh, and they have like these really traditional views on women, on society.
Far right, you mean really
Uh,
Nazi bordering?
I don't know if you can say Nazi. I mean, a lot of them hold anti-Semitic views. A lot of them hold very traditional, traditional man, woman household views with 2 kids. A lot of them hold views like no immigration at all.
We have some political figures as well, but I don't think that they are that radical. They're rather conservative,
Yes.
but I don't think that they're that radical.
Okay. I mean, Jordan Peterson is also not that radical. I think he just has his ideas appeal to them, and that's like I guess the main issue with these sort of thinkers is that, it's not about really a person saying like you don't really have a Hitler sort of figure. You have people that sort of lead you down to these ideas now. So you might have somebody who is slightly right, and they sort of lead you down this sort of pipeline that takes you to more far right ideas. At least that's what's happening in Western Europe and in America. We see that a lot, and that's how we sort of got to Trump and this sort of QAnon conspiracy. I'm not sure how much you might know about that. That's also like a very American, I guess, coincidence that happened in the last few years.
No, I'm just thinking, why do you? Well, no, I know why you do that, but do you think it's problematic to have not extreme right, because extreme is always a problem. Extreme left, to my mind, is as big of a problem as extreme right. But why do you think that would be problematic to hold right views?
The thing is, it's not the right views. I believe there are some issues that maybe I might not agree with. For example, this is one of the reasons why I don't like right or left, because it's hard to define what some people consider a right view and what some people consider left views. For example, I think that people should be paid fairly based on what they do for their work, right?
Yes.
And that is considered a very leftist view. Yes, and for some that might even be considered extreme left. So, for example, I believe that this is personal, by the way. I hope nobody is taking this to. Is it?
It's working.
Okay.
It's working.
There's a camera.
Talking,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, great. So I personally believe that I don't believe that all profits should go to the top people working in a business. I believe that it should be distributed fairly. So not
Yes.
equally, but at least fairly. And people will say that's an extreme left view, but
Well, not extreme, I think. No one would say that it's extremely left.
you'd be very surprised.
I would call it, I don't know, left central left.
Yes, that's what I thought as well, but when I speak about that with people, they really think that it's this sort of unattainable goal, like there's no way we can have this thing, like it has to be a free market, for example. And I guess my main issue, as you were asking why I think people holding these views is bad, is because it's not the fact that they hold these views, but I think a lot of the people, I'm not sure if you know Ben Shapiro, for example. He's a political figure as well in America, but these sort of figures like Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro, they engage in intellectually dishonest debate. So there are right thinkers who, or like people who lean to the right, who I think are more honest in their debate and in what they believe. But when I see Jordan Peterson debating, for example, Zizek about Marxism, he's not entering into intellectually honest debate, and that's my main issue, I guess. And this is with most people I see on the center right or right. I'm not sure what your opinion on that is.
My opinion
Yeah.
is that in politics, this is normal, and you're allowed not to have a fair intellectual debate. My view is that you have to separate very strictly. I think this is the biggest problem that we face nowadays with all this, as well, the COVID problem, where science gained new attention and new political relevance. Now you see people referring to science and scientists everywhere.
Yeah.
And the biggest problem that I see is the that people do not understand that science, no matter if it's the STEM sciences or the humanities, science is not politics. It is a field that works by entirely different rules. When in science you can require people to have honest, well-argued opinion, you can request people to enter into a fair, well-argued game, intellectual conversation. In politics, you have no whatsoever obligation to. In politics, the main thing is that you have to persuade people. You have to persuade them, and a slight dishonesty, rhetoric manipulation, that all belongs to the political field. It's normal. Because, you know why? Because there's nothing that is right or wrong in politics. Rightness or wrongness, these are concepts or categories of science, where you can prove something with this or the other tool as being right or wrong. In politics, there is nothing right or wrong.
And are you saying this as like a Kantian ethicist?
I'm saying it following Hannah Arendt mostly.
I mean, it's true. I do believe, like what you say, and I do believe there is no sort of right or wrong in these political entities. But if we look at it for the most part, I think leftists and center leftists tend not to engage, or at least they tend not to use rhetorical devices that might manipulate people into choosing their side, because they don't want to do it in a sort of dishonest way, or they might feel more morally obliged to be better than their adversaries or their opponents on the right, because maybe they feel like they want to have a better moral high ground, or they want to be seen as more moral than the other side.
Which is the most dangerous thing in politics. When someone takes the higher moral position than the opponent, I think that this can cause the biggest trouble in politics. When the two political opponents don't see each other as equal, fighting for the power and trying to get the biggest part of supporters. But when one of them claims to be on the right side of the history, holding the right views, having a morally superior position, this is the most dangerous thing in politics that ever is possible. And when I see it, the biggest political atrocities committed in the recent history, it all comes from this side of position. You see, the trick is, the biggest atrocities are never done by the pragmatic people. By the corrupt, pragmatic people that are only seeking self-interest. They never make the biggest trouble. The biggest trouble are always done by the ones that think themselves right, morally superior on top, somehow claiming that whatever they're saying, but we are saying the truth. What we say, it actually is right, can be even scientifically proven. And when I hear these sort of arguments in politics, I'm terrified, petrified. It doesn't work in politics. That can only cause a catastrophe. Every one of the totalitarian regimes was referring to scientific arguments. Now the Nazis were referring to the arguments provided for them from the part of the
historical Aryan race, yeah.
And the communists were referring to the economy or history as science. They always had the right arguments that were never disputable. You could never argue with them because they were always right. And that's the most dangerous thing in politics. That can never happen.
Okay. I mean, it's hard to see because at some point I do believe that we all sort of imagine that we want to have a political discussion where everybody is honest with each other and we aren't hiding behind these sort of rhetorical devices to sort of convince other people on what is right and what's wrong and what people should vote for. But in the end, I guess it's just a matter of what the people decide on what they think is right or wrong.
Yes, what they want. This is about politics, is how you want to live, because there are no right answer to the question whether or not you want the wealth of the society to be distributed in a certain way. There's no reason why you could not believe that you want a wild free market. I mean, you might think that this position is somehow unattainable, or maybe it's even, it's a problem for the one who wishes so, because that would mean that he lives in a poorer circumstances.
Exactly.
But there is no reason why you couldn't want to live in a poorer circumstances. You cannot say that this person is right.
But
wrong.
the thing is, I think my main issue, at least when I think about politics and political philosophy, is that I see people voting against their own interests.
Yes, and they're entitled to voting against their own interests.
So is it for you more important to have like this sort of really free democratic society where people can choose what they want, even if it's against their own interests?
Yes, because I don't think that the result is always the best when people do so, but I think the opposite is more dangerous.
Okay.
I think it's more dangerous when someone smarter than people who don't understand their own interest comes and tells them what their interest is. I think the greatest danger lies in there.
Okay.
Yes. I feel more comfortable with people lightheadedly or foolishly voting against their own interest than with the situation where people are forced into the better judgment. This is something, better judgment that very often turns out not to be the better judgment.
Okay.
This is something that I instinctively cannot cope with.
Okay. I mean, I can understand your point, and I guess to some extent I can also agree with it. It's just hard, I guess, to see, like in America, when I see these rural voters voting for Trump, and then he ends up taking sort of jobs away from them, and they still will vote for these right-wing parties. It brings it a bit closer to home, because you start to say, like, these people would be better off if they just, thought that if they just voted for a different party, or at least you think that they would be better off if they voted differently.
Depends what matters more for them. You assume what matters really for them is their jobs and their economic position. Maybe they're just engaging in an ideological fight, and they simply are tired with the opposite ideology winning, and they're willing to suffer the pragmatic problems just to show to the other party, just to get down this Hillary or whatever.
I mean, that's what happened with the 2016 election. Is people, I mean, even left-wing people I know voted against Hillary because they didn't like Trump, but they didn't like the left, the Democratic Party, because they were so fed up with it.
People have complex views, complex specific issues, and people in a lot of cases act against their own interests, not just in politics.
What would you, for example?
I don't know. I see in everyday practical private life people all the time acting against their own interests for short-term good or enjoyment, for instance.
Okay.
They could lead much better lives if they would always do the right choices. They very rarely do.
Okay, I totally get that.
And there are reasons why they don't, and I'm not willing to teach them what they should choose.
That's true. I guess that opened my mind up a little bit more to that sort of line of thinking.
Kant has an example with the, not exactly a diabetic, but a person who suffers a similar kind of problem where he's not supposed to eat certain food, and then he says, well, what is the choice for this person is either to refuse the food that he likes in the hope of a better physical condition, or trade the possibly not grounded hope for the better physical condition for a short-term enjoyment of the food that he likes. Both are satisfaction of certain wishes. Why can't you prefer the short-term wish? I don't know.
Yeah, I guess I don't know either. That's a question for everybody.
This is the danger that Berlin talks about in his two concepts of liberty. You must have
Yes, we
read
talked about
or
that as
talked
well.
about this work.
The positive and negative freedom.
Positive and negative freedom, yes, it's his 58, I think.
He's from Latvia,
essay.
apparently, as well.
Yeah, well,
Or-
yes, he was
Born
born
here,
here,
yes.
but not really, he hasn't
Yeah.
spent time here. But yes, we consider him our philosopher.
Okay.
Berlin. But this is the danger that he sees in liberalism, that liberalism has this coercive potential of the rational part of the human being coercing the sort of non-rational part of the human being. He refers to Kant. Kant sees person as split in two parts, the physical and the rational.
Mm-hmm.
And then the rational has to govern over the physical if you want to lead a reasonable and moral life, you see. And he sees that this is somehow expressing itself in the political terms in liberalism. Liberals, in fact, are only partly liberals because they have this idea that whatever is forced or coerced for rational reasons is not a coercion at all.
Okay.
Or not a problem, or can be justified because it's rational, while there is no reason why to believe that. No, it's still a coercion, even if for rational reasons. It's still not liberal. Liberalism basically is self-contradictory.
I mean, you could say, but a lot of, and I was thinking about this earlier, a lot of humanity, I guess you could say, is in itself self-contradictory or hypocritical, and we sort of live off these sort of self-contradictions. Even, I'm not sure how it is in philosophy, but you sort of explained that. But isn't that sort of a part, I guess, of being a human, is to live in contradiction with yourself, or in hypocrisy even with yourself? Like, you might have certain beliefs that you hold one day and not the next, because you can't fully be aware of everything you've said or you've done or everything you believe in, right?
Contradiction is not always hypocrisy. Why do you say that?
I'm not sure. Do you see them as different?
Yes.
Okay.
You don't know hypocrisy, I believe, is
more like saying something and then believing something else, I guess.
Believing something and then doing something
okay.
contrary, while hiding this contradiction. Well, mostly, contradiction is a larger term. And I believe that, yes, mostly people are very contradictory.
Mm-hmm.
This is why Hegel was right. Hegel is the philosopher of contradiction.
Oh, you mean with his, what was it? It was thesis, antithesis, and then the...
Yes. But of course, for him, it has a metaphysical or ontological meaning. It's not about describing people's psychology, but also in psychological terms, yes, people are very contradictory. It's just normality. There is no reason to treat it as a particular problem.
Okay. Yeah, I totally understand that.
Again, contradiction is a problem in science. This is the biggest problem now, that people want to live by the standards of science or scientific standards. They think if something is scientifically right, that it has an immediate political or personal relevance. Well, it doesn't. Something can be scientifically right, non-contradictory, because rightness is right. The opposition or opposite to contradiction. And it doesn't have to have any relevance. There is no force that can force you rightly to follow something that is scientifically right or proven. Why the hell?
I think they see it as, at least they see science as something sort of rational.
Yes, but why would they follow that?
I'm not sure. I guess it's just how they see it, in the end.
It has a place in academia, that's true. There you cannot say foolish or contradictory things or act foolishly. There, the main topic is to find the truth, to find the good arguments, to find out how is it. While in politics or in your personal life, you can choose whether you want to act by the good rational arguments, whether you want to follow the scientific or whatever truth, or you want to just feel like you want to feel and you want to live like you feel. You have to have the choice if this is to be a free society. No one can coerce you to do right things, because coercion is still a coercion, no matter by which grounds or for which reasons you are coerced.
And you don't see coercion as a bad thing, or?
That depends.
And it's a bit.
But I certainly see it as a problem in a liberal society when there is too much coercion.
Okay, and it's funny to me because when I thought when you told me that you study Kantian ethics, I expect you to come in here with like really strict, categorical imperative views, like coming in with, okay, this is wrong, and it seems you're more, I guess, fluid. Does Kant even himself sort of believe in these very strict, rigid, ethical rules?
Depends on what you mean with believe in, because he has been a lot of times wrongly accused in personally holding some kind of terribly strict ethical rules.
Yeah.
Well, he's not. He's often stressing the very fact that what he is doing is simply showing to people or arguing for how the moral action functions, what is the basis or at the roots of a moral action, how an action is supposed to be in order to call it moral. He never argued that people have to do that.
Okay.
In fact, in his work, Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals, he says that what he does here is a job of a mathematician. He's showing the formula for a morally good action. Now, he's far from saying that now everyone has to act like that.
Okay.
This is not at all Kant. Kant is very careful, but this is why Hannah Arendt considers Kant to be an exception in this very long tradition of bad relationship between politics and philosophy, which started with Plato. She says that Plato initiated a very difficult relationship between philosophy or science and politics, precisely because Plato thought that people have to live by a philosophical truth. Well, she says Kant is an exception from that.
Okay.
And he is. He never argued that people have to live like that.
Okay.
It's very cool. He says, like, I'm just going to tell you how it is, and that's it. You can choose if you want to live like that or not.
And it's funny, I was reading something about Hannah Arendt in one of her lectures on Kant. And does she herself rely heavily on Kant's philosophy?
Ethics?
Yeah.
She sort of develops her theory of evil, both theories of evil.
I've read Über das Böse, right? Where she talks about evil and...
Yes, she's considered to have two theories of evil. One is the one that she develops in the early 50s when she publishes The Origins of Totalitarianism.
Okay, not...
She sort of develops this theory of the absolute radical evil, and then later with the Eichmann book in the 60s, then she develops this famous theory of the banality of evil.
That's the one that I've read, Over the Banality of Evil.
Yes, and then there I would say she holds an original views in both cases, in both theories, but she develops these views through or by means or being in discussion with Kantian ethics. The Kantian ethics is very important for her to develop her theory of evil. That's true. He sort of did the same mistake. A scientist, philosopher, is not supposed to get involved in politics. That isn't going to end well.
Okay.
Neither for politics nor for the scientists, precisely because these fields are too different. The truth has not much relevance in politics.
Okay. I mean, that's true. I totally agree. I think most people see politics as, or at least they see their politicians as the ones telling the truth, whereas the others are speaking fallacies. But
But there is no. I cannot imagine any political question except whether or not we are allowed to put in gas chambers certain groups of our inhabitants. That of course crosses every possible border. But I cannot imagine any politically relevant question where you can give a right or wrong answer. Well, is it right or wrong to well, for instance, to allow only certain people to get married?
I mean, so like I think so you don't think that there isn't a right or wrong?
No, because it's a question of values,
That's
of
true.
your moral position, of your values, of their worldview. And in these questions, there is not such a thing as right or wrong. How can you determine what is right? How can you say that the Christians are wrong?
I mean, I guess, like, I do agree with you to some extent, but I believe, I guess, as humans, and when you sort of live in a society, you sort of accept a certain social contract that humans have a duty to one another to allow for certain freedoms. You know, people have certain freedoms, and as long as they, and we talked about, you know, Isaiah Berlin, we can also talk about other figures who talk about freedom, like, I guess, Thomas Hobbes.
Yes.
That when you enter society, and I guess pretty much everybody lives in a society in some sense, you are contractually obligated to not infringe on people's rights, on people's freedoms, I guess, as long as they don't infringe upon yours.
Yes, but you always negotiate in a society what these freedoms are. There's no given set of freedoms. I mean, surely, again, there are borders that no one can cross, like you have the right to stay alive. Like, really.
So, for example, why is that something like a border that nobody can cross? But let's say, for example,
because there are certain conditions of, well, you see, the necessary rights to be granted, rights and freedoms to be granted, are the ones that form the condition to be a member of a political life. I mean, you need to have certain resources as rights and freedoms to be a member of a political community. Say, for that you need to be alive. That's the first thing.
Okay.
For that you need to have a possibility to vote. For that you need some kind of minimum income, because you cannot be reduced to a very poorly state where you cannot think about politics or society, where you have to think about how to get the daily bread. You cannot be reduced to that kind of state. There is a set of things you need to function as a part of this community.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's good that you're starting to bring this up, because I guess I can sort of bring a counter argument, because you're talking about these basic needs, right? And you do believe that we should have some sort of a democratic system, right? Personally, like for you yourself.
Very much.
I believe that in order for a democratic system to function, we do have to have also a set of basic needs that need to be fulfilled. One of them being people should be educated, at least in certain ways with logic. Like, people should be able to think logically. People should be free of burdens. And I don't mean just being able to eat. I think people should have enough wealth to be able to live a life where they can live comfortably without worrying about food, about shelter, and also be able to enjoy their lives.
A decent minimal income.
But I think like my idea of a decent minimal income is different than, for example, the government.
Yes, it's also a topic of negotiation.
And we can negotiate that. But for example, when we were talking about, you know, alt-right figures, they think it's enough to be able to eat, to like find a place to sleep, to have like a very basic education, or like, you know, just to go to high school and that's it, or to have a very basic enjoyment in life, like maybe have a TV or have internet. Whereas I think that's not enough. I think people should have enough income where they can travel at least once or twice a year, because I think being able to travel and see different cultures is something that's needed by people, so they can experience different parts and different cultures and aspects of life, because that in turn helps them understand different perspectives, and that makes them more valuable to the democratic process. So when you talk about, you know, people should have these like basic freedoms. I believe that,
Right, yes.
you know, it really depends on how far are we willing to go for that, and also why I don't agree that every view is exactly right in the political.
None is right. My
Well,
argument is
yeah,
precisely
exactly.
none is right.
But that's why I believe, for example, that I personally believe that some are, maybe not everybody's right, but some are more right than others. So
Some are more right than you really want to go there.
like, I mean, you know, Caesar had this idea, first among others, us first among equals, right?
Yes.
Prima, I forgot what it was. It was a Latin term. It was like,
Yes, well, you can quote Orwell for that.
yeah. I guess that's
if you want
true.
a less noble source
Yeah.
than Caesar. However, I still think that in principle, it's impossible to determine in politics the right things. I mean, the right things is, my argument is that the right things, it's wrong or it's not right to refuse people the necessary conditions for them to become the member of the society. And I named you the conditions, and of course they can be negotiated, and you can talk about which one are the right and how much minimal income should there be. But then again, there are pragmatic restrictions. I mean, if the state budget allows you only a certain amount,
true.
this is the amount that you can give. And
That's true.
your responsibility is to distribute it fairly, but you cannot increase it enormously. You cannot. But the questions that are now considered to be right or wrong, say the question about same-sex marriage, this to my mind is absolutely not a right or wrong question.
Really?
None of this is right or wrong. No, it's not. What is wrong, though, is for the same-sex partners not to grant the same judicial rights.
Okay.
When it comes to inheritance or care for extended family members or whatever, there are practical issues dealing with money, that is wrong.
You're thinking more about in an ethical or religious sort of sense.
I mean, yes, because the marriage or the family, like in the, I don't know if you've been following, but we have this grand debate now about how to twist or to change this concept of family in order for the same-sex partners to fit in there, you see. But that concept, it is a concept that comes from a certain ethical view or is based on certain values, and you cannot twist it differently. That's not possible. These are the values that people have agreed on. This is what they want, and there is nothing wrong or right about it.
No, I understand now your position on that.
I don't really see, and I recently participated. There was a conference. You know, we had the Baltic Pride.
Yeah.
And there was a conference within the week of Pride, not a scientific one, because there were mostly politicians or judges participating.
Where was it?
In Hansa Sperons.
Okay.
Or people that are involved in the NGOs from different countries, and I was also there representing the University of Latvia. I was holding a paper on the dignity, on the concept of the human dignity. And this is, of course, something that philosophers can talk about. And the very pressing point in this conference that somehow the same-sex marriage is an issue of human dignity, which would mean, if we translate it in the terms of our conversation, means that it is wrong not to allow same-sex marriage. It's simply wrong. It's not a political question that you have to debate. If you're against them, the same-sex marriage, then you're wrong, which is something that there is no tool for. No matter how I sympathize with these people, there is no rational argument how I can ground this position. There is not. Then I talked with someone after after party about this, sort of, and he was very much arguing for this position. And I said to him, then what about polygamy, for instance?
I mean, there's nothing, I guess you could say, against
What
that.
the hell is then the argument against polygamy? There is no one. And then he started to say, but no, it's different, polygamy, somehow this is culturally determined. But also the concept of family as a union among men and women are culturally determined. And what are we talking about here?
No, I totally agree with what you mean. But
and I'm not for or against. I mean, for Christ's sake, allow them, but then also allow polygamy. Because rationally, this is the only way. There is no other.
Wouldn't it be better to just sort of end this idea of contractual marriage between the states, so it can be more of a cultural or religious thing? Yeah. Because as far as I see it, I mean, marriage really does come from, tradition.
It's it has a religious background,
yeah, of course.
This idea,
and
yes.
Now it's become also a way for the state to use it as a means, for tax breaks, so people will have kids, and then it helps the state bring in more revenue because the more people they have. And that's, I guess, the main reason why the state is still so attached to this idea of being in control of marriages. Don't you think it would just be better to sort of allow for the state to, end the idea of state contractual marriages and just allow for, unions between people, I guess?
I believe so. If the largest part of the society is ready and willing to detach from the traditional values, then yes, because this is what the state should count on, of the opinion of the inhabitants. If most of the Latvian people really don't hold in such high value the traditional roots of this concept of marriage, yes, the state should follow the opinion of the inhabitants. Surely, this is what I think. But I don't think that Latvian people are
ready
there
for
yet,
that.
which is not the question here. But I think that yes, the state has to follow the values and the opinions of the majority. This is simply what democracy is. Of course, it also means to protect the rights of minorities, but to protect the rights of minorities doesn't mean exactly that. It doesn't mean to change the main course of the state, ideological or value course.
But what if the minority is deciding a lot, or has a influence greater than their selves on the majority? For example, I'm not sure how it is in Latvia, but in America, rural voters, their votes are weighed more than people living in cities, because if we counted everybody's vote equally, rural voters would make up pretty much nothing, and they vote overwhelmingly, conservative, whereas people living in cities vote overwhelmingly liberal.
Yes.
So at what point does the right of a minority infringe on the rights of the majority? And I'm not sure how it is in Latvia. Do you guys experience the same thing here, where sort of rural voters end up, influencing elections majorly?
No, also because we have very well. This is specifics of how people are distributed in this country, and also the activity of the voters. That is also a specific issue. But I think that as such, this problem is only going to be more pressing a minority, an active and loud minority, trying to suppress or dominate or rule the majority. This is only going to be the trend now.
I imagine so.
Which I believe it's anti-democratic, obviously.
Yeah.
It's a problem with the term of democracy, and I also think it's quite dangerous. As in any case of where a rather small group of people determines the course of a larger society, because I believe that the larger society is less capable of making radical
change
and problematic moves.
And do you find anything wrong with radical change in itself? Just like really quick, fast change?
Not always, but not always where radical change happens. It ends in a disaster, but everywhere where there's a disaster, I think
There's radical
it
change.
comes about by a radical change.
Okay. And we should probably be
Yes.
ending soon. Do you want to have any final words?
No, I said it all. Honestly, I think I've been more open than I should have been, but that's fine.
But I want to
I
thank
don't
you
regret it.
so much for coming and taking your time out, and I really enjoyed the conversation. I hope maybe in the future we could have something if
I hope you will have conversations like this with my colleagues.
Yeah, I hope so as well. And maybe we'll see each other at some other events. But thank you again so much for coming.
Thank you also as well.
All right.
Very interesting partner to talk with.
Thank you. Hi guys, I want to thank Valodu Maja, which is the language house or house of languages here at Avotu Iela 33, for letting us shoot our very first episode. They offer a variety of services. They have a bunch of secondhand books here you can buy. They have a library which includes a ton of different languages, from Icelandic to English, Latvian, Russian. They offer a bunch of events that happening last week. I believe they had a poetry event, and they offer language courses, translation services, and much, much more. I'll link all their information down below. Please check them out if you can. Check out their Instagram and follow them. Give them a like, share, or just come by the shop sometime and get a book. Thanks again.